Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dress and Drinks. The Costume Society of America thanks you for joining us today, and this and in others of our Conversations on Dress webinar series. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm Leon Wiebers. I am a professor of costume design at Loyola Marymount University and your host of this series. Today, we are going to be joined by wonderful curator Julie Kemper, the curator of object learning at the Kentucky Historical Society. Working with a state institution means clue hunting and fact-finding, as the collection provides an education in both broad histories and the nitty-gritty of how people really lived. Maternity allowances, growth pleats, buttons for diaper access, etc. Like many of us, Kemper romanticizes the clothing of the Victorian era, loves the hidden stories within history, and gets lost in the details. She looks for signs of life lived beyond someone's job or role in society, finding the puzzle pieces of personality through clothing. As someone who has been working in historic sites and museums for over 30 years, now leading a collection that reflects an entire state and its people, she's sure to have a lot of fashion and a lot of personalities to tell us about. In particular, tune in to hear about this recent exhibition that opened, Our Stories, Our Service, Kentucky Women's Veterans. And today she's going to show us through and take us through a wonderful portion of her storage and look at some amazing objects. And her cameraman for today is Greg Hardison on camera, helping out with all of this. So welcome, please. And Julie, please join us here on Dress and Drinks. So bring your camera back on and let's get the show on the road. While we're doing that, as a reminder, our cocktail for today is the mint julep, and the alcohol-free version of that is the mint lemonade. So excellent. Welcome, Julie and Greg. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, and welcome to the object storage at the Kentucky Historical Society. We are in our textile room right now. Greg's going to show you a little bit of it. He is actually on the mezzanine on the upper level. On that level is where we store a variety of hats. You're going to see a few of them through some of the glass windows, but we also have purses and belts and all sorts of small items related to textiles. You'll see that our hat collection is a wide variety. Literally, our very first object that we can track that was donated to the Kentucky Historical Society in the 1780s is a hat. So that's kind of exciting, and we still continue to collect them today. On our main level of textile storage, we have mostly larger items, but some small items too. We have some cabinets here that have actually military medals, all sorts of political buttons. The large boxes behind me are where some of our larger textiles are stored, including big dresses and big uniforms. Behind me now is rolled storage, which is one of my favorite things because I've never worked in a museum that had rolled storage before. So there we'll find quilts and blankets and flags and rugs, a whole variety of materials there. And actually, there's a few really large shawls with fringe literally a foot long. They're hard to roll, but we did it. Also, for items that need a little bit more care, we're lucky enough to have just a few of these larger flat cabinets. So we have to choose very carefully what we can have room to store in these. But we tend to store items that are particularly fragile. This one you can see with these puffy sleeves would just be a disaster in a box. So a little bit of those kinds of things. We do have a few bits of flat storage for. We're actually going to go now out into what we refer to as main storage. It's where the big stuff is. So you'll see some larger vehicles and those kinds of things. If you have questions about things that are in the background, if you'll put them in the chat, I'll be sure to answer all of that. So
Okay.
we have
Wow.
over
I'm gonna.
1,000 objects here at the Kentucky Historical Society collections. Over 3,000 of those are textiles. So there's a lot to choose from. I had a hard time narrowing it down, but we're actually going to focus on some pieces between 1870 and 1900. A number of them aren't exactly dated, but I'll give you some guesses, let you guess a little bit on where we are in those. So we're going to look at one specific collection that was donated all one time, and then a larger collection that's sort of put together that I've pieced together. So the first thing we have is this collection that was, like I said, it was donated in one piece. It arrived in 1976. And one of the coolest parts of this actually is this Louis Vuitton trunk. The collection was donated by brother and sister, Dr. Caroline Scott and Dr. Thornton Scott. The trunk and the materials belong to Margaret and William Preston and their children, but a large number of the pieces are from Jessie Preston Draper, their daughter, who was born in 1855 in Lexington. This family lived in Lexington. They were very wealthy, as you can guess by the Louis Vuitton trunk, because isn't it fabulous? It dates to about 1900. The main way we've been able to date that is actually the labels. So when Greg goes back towards the front, you will see the ribbon in the interior of the top there. So of course, Louis Vuitton started his business in 1854 in Paris, but between the labels on the ribbon, which is a signature of Louis Vuitton now, and the label on the inside, we're able to date this to about 1900. So with Jessie being born in 1855, this was really something she used later in life. And traveled with. She was, like I said, she was a well-to-do woman, so she was traveling quite a bit. Now, what's really unusual is, in addition to the trunk, we also have the canvas cover that went with it. And I forgot to mention, on the side of the trunk, you might have noticed it had Jessie Preston Draper's initials and the number 2. You'll notice the canvas cover has the number 2 on it as well. So she had at least 2 of these dang things. But it's someone else's initials. So the initials there are actually Carolyn Preston Scott. So she was Jessie's niece, and she's the mother of the donor. So that's how all of this came to us. Jessie's materials went to her sister, and then down through her sister to the donors. In
Yeah,
this
go ahead.
trunk was a variety of items, a lot of clothing, especially from Jessie, and so I chose out some of my favorites.
And what an amazing treasure for you to have. And I have to say, this is the first time I've ever seen the inside of a Louis Vuitton trunk. So I noticed the ribbon and the nail, the tufting on the lid. Is the ribbon also Louis Vuitton printed? I couldn't quite tell. It looks like it is also said.
It is printed with Louis Vuitton, and so that was one of our indicators for dating it. Was between the printed ribbon and then this label.
Oh, nice. And does the tray itself, it must come out, and then and is the interior as beautiful as the exterior still?
Yeah, it is. It is lined with linen. It's glued on wood. It's a little bit tricky to get out, so I decided not to try to open it. But it's all lined in the same white linen.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. That's really amazing.
Yeah,
It looks
it's a great piece. We It stays in storage for the most part, but the light wouldn't be great for it. But it is really cool piece. And then so for a long time, what was interesting is for a long time the rumor was that all of these pieces arrived inside the trunk. But I have determined from staff who are actually here that that's not actually true. It wasn't. These pieces weren't in the trunk when the trunk arrived. Am I good?
Don't you love that?
Um,
Don't you love those anecdotal stories about, like, oh, this is what happened and this is what this is?
right. Exactly. Exactly. All right. So this is one of the fabulous pieces that came in with the collection.
Oh,
Um, and so here's what happens when families bring their collection. If there is a white dress and if it is at all fancy, they say, "Oh, this is grandma's wedding dress." But of course, we know that not all wedding dresses were white. But the family, brought this collection and said, "This is Jessie's wedding dress." Jessie was married to George Draper in November of 1890. She was 35 years old when she got married, which, if you think about
wow.
at the time, like she was a little bit older when she married. Her sister was also in her 30s when she married. So I don't know if it was a family thing, or they certainly had the money to be desirable to a lot of men in the time period. But she was 35 years old. They actually got married in the Preston home in Lexington. And so the great thing about having a lot of money is that people pay attention to you. And so the wedding was covered in several newspapers, both in Kentucky and outside of Kentucky. And so in one newspaper, it noted that Jessie wore a Worth gown, which this is a Worth gown, and I'll cover that in a minute. Quote, "of white satin, trimmed with the richest of lace, and embroidered with seed pearls arranged in love knots." So that truly confirms that this was her wedding dress. It is a Charles Worth Charles Worth dress. Of course, he was considered the father of haute couture, and the fashion house for the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So she was definitely putting some money into this thing. In addition to the seed pearls, there are these drop pearls, which they didn't mention. It is a two-piece outfit, so the skirt is separate from the bodice, but not from the underskirt. So we have this beautiful satin underskirt, and then the little slit on the side um, with the tiny little seed pearls. Unfortunately, this piece used to go all the way to the bottom of the dress, and somewhere along the line was torn, and so it unfortunately has that bit of damage. The connection between the bodice and the skirt is actually covered by this this little covering here of, I'm losing this word right now that I want. But so that covers it quite a bit. And of course it has full bustle and a long train. A lot of the connections, the hooks and all of those are just not usable. So it takes a little bit of art and trickery to try to get this dress on a form. It hasn't been on a form actually quite a few years, so I'm pretty excited to see it and get some. Greg took some great pictures of it for us, so when you go to our online catalog, you can actually see it looking beautiful online. So.
It's really stunning. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. The embroidery, the beadwork, the like it's really quite lovely. And the sleeves, are that's like 4 layers? Are they concentric? Yes. Oh, how wonderful these concentric circles of that's really delightful. And
Right.
that beaded
Yeah.
fringe.
Yes, and then the proper left sleeve is just slightly more full than the proper right sleeve, which I think is actually intentional. I don't think it's just out of shape from being in storage. So, I was looking at Worth gowns from that period. Just a little bit of a height difference from one shoulder to another was something I saw pretty commonly. So.
Well,
It
it's really
is
interesting.
gorgeous.
Worth, we often think of Worth as doing these completely, and this time period as being absolutely symmetrical. But Worth
Mhm.
actually also became known and very well known for doing his slight asymmetrical work. So this follows that. I mean, he was the master of asymmetry.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up because that's actually another point for our next dress that I'm going to bring up. So we're going to head this way. This is another of Jessie's dresses. It does, so unlike the wedding dress, which actually had the Worth label on the inside, so it was on the, if you are familiar with bodices from this time period, they had sort of a belt on the inside that helped support everything and keep the bodice in place. Both of these dresses have that. The wedding dress says has Worth name on it. This one does not. Now, it might be that that piece was replaced. According to an appraiser that was hired by the donors, he considered this a Worth gown that just wasn't labeled. It is dated about 1895, so only about 5 years after she was married. She was 40 years old. And so you talked about the asymmetrical lines, which I saw often in his work, which you see often in his work, but notice this dress doesn't have those asymmetrical lines. It has this really incredible embroidery done with metal thread. That's why it's so beautiful and shiny. It has some beadwork on there too. And then
Wow.
every time I look at the velvet crisscross at the top, somehow I just always think Romeo and Juliet. So this is me being romantic, right? So it just reminds me of a costume you would see in Romeo and Juliet on the top. It is also satin with many layers going into it as well. It's interesting that it is long sleeved. And so, I wondered if there was perhaps a second bodice that went to it, which wouldn't be all that unusual either. So then, also the back is particularly interesting on this dress because, like all of these dresses, they opened at the back, but this one is particularly concealed. So when this opens up, this piece of decorative layering with the satin actually opens up. You can see the hooks. I didn't hook all of them because it's not in the best shape. And then this middle section with the tulle and the velvet actually goes in between this decorative layer and then the under layer that actually has the stays in it. So surprisingly, you can actually see the stays on her wedding dress, but they're completely hidden on this dress. And you can even see, I don't know why they felt this was necessary, but this bit of tulle at the top was added to offer more coverage. The tulle's in such terrible shape, I didn't try to connect it, but you see the little hooks, and then the eyes are actually underneath this velvet piece here. The unfortunate thing about this beautiful tulle is that it is very brittle, and it's not really holding up over time, unlike the satin and some of the other things. The tulle is just really struggling. But another beautiful train there.
Yeah, that's really great. And it has, as you said, it really has that feeling or reference point of the Renaissance and
Mhm.
with the crisscrossing in a sort of a Shakespearean kind of way. But I also think to your point about that little piece in the back, it carries that sort of puffed sleevey, puffing, slashing aspect of a chemise through in a way which
Mm.
help carry that through. It's really beautiful. And actually, what's interesting is that the embroidery doesn't look like it perfectly repeats from one side to the next. It seems so the asymmetry may be hidden in the embroidery in some ways.
That's an interesting point. I actually hadn't noticed that.
Yeah, like I noticed that in the front, but it's not perfectly the same from one side to the
Right.
next. And up at sort of the shoulder blade area, it looks like so the flowers on that side go kind of up, and the flowers on the other side sort of splay around in a way. It may just be that way it's on the form, but it's so that's worth investigation.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had not noticed that. But another beautiful piece for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next piece I want to look at is actually where I have a question for everyone because it's something I'm just not quite sure about. So this dress that's actually laying on this table here, the reason it's on the table is because the silk lining is in such terrible shape. Greg, let's sort of show them here real quick. You can see where it's shredding.
Oh yeah.
It's just a mess. So I can no longer put it on a mount. It's purely a study piece. These are things, like I said, that researchers, actually I think I never made that point, can come to visit. I'll go back to that. So this is another piece from Jessie. It is actually made by Howard and Company of New York. The appraiser put this time period of 1905 to 1908 on it, which I kind of see why he did that because of the lace and so on around the square neckline, but I'm not so sure. So this is my theory. Honestly, I guess I should mention there's two bodices. So you have the long sleeve bodice, you have a short sleeve, almost 3/4 length bodice, and then the skirt. So to me, this is literally the ugliest dress I have ever seen in my whole life. I will stand by that opinion. And what makes me say that is if you look at this, there's this beautiful green silk that is the base to the entire dress. And then over that green silk has been laid this black tulle and a ton of beadwork. There's sequins. There, especially on the short one, these tassels are in the back. In the front, these huge long tassels, which are, I think they're a combination of both glass and jet, are in the front. There is this oval piece here that is looking a little bit like a brooch. So this is my theory. I think that this dress was being altered to be a morning gown because there's a lot of brocade under here. The skirt especially has brocade and beading that it doesn't make sense to cover it. Look at these beading here. So my theory is that this dress was being turned into a morning dress. The waist is either not finished or was taken apart again later. So if you look at the waistline here, you can see this hand stitching, almost basting, I can actually sew better than that, attaching the black tulle, or it's a chiffon probably, to the skirt itself. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on with that. So I'd love people to let me know whether they agree. Oh, the other evidence for that, I forgot, is actually the gown or the bodice here that is short sleeved. So if you'll notice these sleeves here, unlike the long sleeves, have no bit of green in them at all. But when you lift under, you can see that the armhole has a green ruffle underneath all of this stuff. And so I'm guessing that this sleeve was added later, that it was not original to the dress. Now, I might be completely wrong, so I'd love to know what people think about that.
Excellent. That's a great mystery. I mean, you never know how garments take on different lives through their time. It's really, difficult to sort out where they go and what they become. And especially with all that embellishment under the net.
Yeah, and the other thing I did was I looked at Jessie's family and I tried to figure out if someone close to her died in that early 1900s period. And there's no one that died right near that time. She lost a daughter, she lost her mother and her father all prior to that point, and then her husband died much later in 1920. So maybe the gown was altered for that another 10 years later, but she was so fashionable, I can't imagine that she would have put up with just anything. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. So.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting mystery. Thank you very much.
So I have one more piece of Jessie's to show you, and that is this cape. There's a few of her mother's pieces in the collection as well, but they're not nearly as stunning as this cape. So it is a very fine wool on the outside. You can see that the decoration has all been hand sewn onto the trim. And it is lined with silk, which is in really good shape. It's a silk satin.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Um, but yet she definitely wore it because if you look at the silk around the collar, it has a good bit of wear. It's starting to fray. And so she definitely wore this. It wasn't something that, she only wore a couple times. It's been dated to about 1895, but it's another beautiful piece from that collection.
How does it move? How does it feel?
Oh, well, okay, so the wool is very, very soft. At first I thought maybe it was actually a wool and silk mix, but I don't believe that it is. It is machine sewn, by the way, and also has a cat hair on it. How about that? Not for me. I don't have cats. um, you would actually be surprised the number of collections that come to the museum that have cat hair and dog hair and people hair on them. You'd be shocked.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Actually, we have at LMU, we have a Shakespeare First folio, and a scholar came and looked at it, and he was like, "There are all these pieces of hair in the folio. I'm going to call this the hairy folio." So,
well, it does happen, but it's exceptionally soft. The lining just really is in incredible shape. Of course it has nice big armholes. This I don't know what to call it. It's not quite rope. I don't know what you would call it. I'm not great at the proper names of everything. But so it lines the armhole. I mean, this is definitely something that's going to fit over a larger gown.
yeah, that must move just beautifully. It looks so lovely and wonderful. It's
Yeah.
gorgeous.
I mean, you could see it on a runway today.
That's
It's
all.
really beautiful. So that's a peep at Jessie's collection. Just a few of the things that were in that. Um, and so you can actually go to our online catalog if you want to see all of them. You can go to our objects catalog and literally just put in Jessie and Drapier, and you'll come up with it.
How many pieces are in the collection, the Jesse's collection in total that you have?
I think it's about 20.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
Yeah, so it's not all clothing though. There's actually this like I said, there's some of her mother's clothing, including the skirt that she wore to Jesse's wedding. The interesting thing is that it's black. And so the appraiser felt like there was no way that that's what she wore to her daughter's wedding. But the family history was very clear about it. So that's a good another question. Jesse's mother also was a very large person. And if you look at the picture of it, it's a terrible picture because I had a really hard time putting it on any kind of dress form to get it to sit and take a photograph of it. I probably should redo that. But and like I said, there are a lot of smaller things too. Jesse's father was a politician in Kentucky, and he was also the ambassador to Spain. So there are some materials in there related to his work for politics and also when he went to Spain, including his briefcase and some other things. It has sort of a variety in there, but all related to basically the parents and Jessie. And I think there might be a couple of items from her sister.
Oh, nice. Well, and in when we met before, you mentioned that these were larger dresses than other things. What are the measurements of it? When we're saying this, I think it's often, in our world and people who know what we're talking about, we're so used to seeing these tiny little corsets or these tiny little bodices,
Yeah.
that have survived. And so often, as we all know, things get recut or reshaped, as you've mentioned. So what is the waist and the bust of that bodice?
Oh, so I don't know the bust, but the waist on what I call the Juliet dress, the waist on that dress is actually 36 inches.
Oh,
The wedding dress, I don't remember exactly the measurements, but it's slightly smaller. I figure she's 5 years older.
Right.
And then the green dress is actually impossible to measure the waist because the waist is unfinished. But she, you figure she had 3 children. She lost one of them at a young age, but she had 3 children somewhere and along there, probably in between the wedding dress and the Juliet dress. So my guess is that, like all of us who have children, we tend to put on extra couple pounds that don't go away after you have kids. We'll claim that one. So, she was not a small person, and like I said, her mother, I bet you that dress, that skirt has got to be 50 inches around, something
Oh,
like
wow.
that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, we'll take a few minutes to talk about the next set of clothing I put together. These were not one donation, but I thought it would be fun to look at children's clothing. And one of the challenges of children's clothing is the fact that they're hard to date, okay, because what children wore often didn't change for generations. So occasionally you'll see something that just sparks a particular time period, but especially in the younger ones, it's really hard to date. I did not do infants at all. You will see no baptismal gowns, but this little dress and cape is one of my favorites. It is a wool and silk mix, actually. And it's also machine stitched. And I kind of the 2 capes together were sort of interesting. So this little top cape here
Oh
has
my God,
bows
that's so
down the
cute.
back.
Oh my
Um,
God, that's so
with these little
cute.
mother of pearl, I guess buckles is the best way to call them. Unfortunately, the ribbons are not flat, but so that's the little bit of design and the 3 stripes. Now, what's interesting is that you can see the original purple under here. This one's hasn't faded too much there, but you can see the original color of purple. Now the dress ribbons have actually faded quite a bit, but they're still there. The 3 bands at the bottom, 2 on the sleeves. Oh, and I forgot to mention the cape is actually lined in silk. The dress, however, is lined in linen. I'm going to put this cape down. The dress is lined in linen, very simply. And then what's really interesting is at the neck, there's definitely like slobber stains. So, I mean, this is a small child. So it was probably the teething era time period. I've been there. So this was worn probably by a brother and sister. We know it was worn by May Stone. She was born in 1867. So it's just, kind of hitting that 1870s time period. I was stretching a little bit. It may, of course, at that time, boys also wore dresses. So it may have also been worn by her brother, who surprisingly, his name is June, and he was born in 1868. Unfortunately, he died fairly young, but I can see how they both would have perhaps worn this dress.
Okay, my new favorite costume term is slobber stains.
Well, if it fits, so let's hope it doesn't happen with adults quite so much.
I've
With
never had
babies,
that one, and I'm
absolutely.
very excited about that. Oh, that's just slobber stains.
This next dress is dated to about 1870. I thought these were a good pairing because they're about the same time period, very similar in shape, but yet one feels kind of masculine and one feels kind of feminine. Um, I actually had to phone a friend to find out the weave of this dress. It is an interrupted pointed twill. Thank you, Adam. And so it is wool. It's just a beautiful material. It's in really good shape. There's a few points of insect damage, but not a whole lot. Um, it has a velvet collar at the top and this tiny little lace collar, and then also at the sleeves. And one of my favorite things is actually the buttons. So they are glass and brass, and not only do they line the front, there's buttons on the sleeve, as would be pretty
Oh,
typical for sort of mocking a military style, and then the back. You notice how the pleats flip out to give a little bit of fullness to the back, and then those same buttons are used as decoration. I mean, this is a very fine piece. He would not be playing in this. And I keep saying he because it was worn by Joe Pumphrey, who was born in 1868. He lived in Fleming County, Kentucky. And according to the family history, he wore this when he was 2 years old. So
What
right
is
up.
what's the is there a closure up the back or is the closure up the front?
Now, it's at the front. Now this is a solid seam.
Oh, in the camera, like it has because it looks like there's a stitch line next to it. I was like, it looks like there's a zipper going up the back, and I was like,
No,
what in the world is that?
it's just a little creased there.
Yeah,
But no, these
gotcha.
buttons. This is the only opening here.
Nice. Okay. Um, very interesting, very adorable.
So the next two pieces are white pieces because I can't imagine putting my children in white. My son does not have any white t-shirts. Of course, he doesn't wear anything but t-shirts. But white clothing was very common for children. If you're going to starch them, they're really easy to clean. This little dress is dated to about 1884. That is an estimate on my part. We know it was worn by Lawson Jefferson Oxley, who was born in 1882 in Nicholasville, Kentucky. Um, and according to the donor, this dress was worn with a petticoat that also came with the collection. So this is the only petticoat in the collection that would match as far as size and that sort of thing. And so I started looking at the patterns to see if they were alike, and they're similar, but they're not alike. They have the open work, they have the leaf pattern, but those are such common motifs, it's hard to tell if they actually went together. But the other thing about this dress is that it actually, you would need something to line the whole thing. So this little petticoat here has buttons on the inside. So there would be a upper piece, some kind of blouse, which would have the buttons, and the buttonholes would attach to the blouse, and that would go underneath this whole thing.
Yeah, a little.
So
That's a very common thing that we see, for having that little extra ruffle add on in a way.
right,
Really
yeah.
sweet.
I wish we had the upper piece to it, but we just don't quite have it. So, but that's a sweet little piece. Next, we have this romper. So this dates to about 1870. Um, so we actually have a picture of the little boy who wore this in this outfit. So the little boy wearing it is David Alexander McCandless. He was born in Hart, Kentucky in 1865. He actually became a judge, so we have a good bit of information about him. So the romper here, lots of frills. The buttons are porcelain. And so they go all the way down the front and then connect the blouse to the pants. There is no front opening at all. The pants open on the side. They open on the side and fairly, this one's ripped a little bit, but a fairly deep down. So they would have opened to about here. So that's easy access for active little boys, I guess. And it also has pockets, which of course in trousers are more common, but you can see the little pocket right here, and it is lined in the same material as the romper, this white cotton. But so there's a picture of him with his older sister wearing this little romper.
I love the little ruffles along the sides of the legs of that. That's just such an adorable, like, fancy little thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So these side ruffles, it's just one ruffle, but the sleeves and also the placard have two ruffles um, as well as the collar are all two sets of two ruffles. Unfortunately, the buttons are missing from the cuffs. Will be good. This next little outfit is sort of the typical Lord Fauntleroy. I can't say it right.
Lord
Yeah.
Fauntleroy.
What Greg said. It's from about 1892. It probably was a pure black. It's a good bit of fading at this point. And it was worn by the sons of Walter and Claire Piggott. And actually, Walter immigrated from England, so it seems perfect that he would like this particular style. And what I love about this is that, of course, there would have been a blouse that tucked in and attached. So originally, the blouse would have had the buttons, and then they would go through the buttonholes on the pants. But later on, someone added a second button, like another layer. So if you had a blouse that had the buttonholes and not the buttons, you could have worn it as well. I don't know if they would have done that at the same time or if it was altered for a particular blouse. But it's a cute little piece. And one of the reasons you can tell those are added is the regular buttons are covered in fabric. They're not metal, whereas those are metal. This next dress is one of my favorites. And what I've done is I've set up a series of 3 dresses here. This red one is really hard to date. I really struggled with this. It was, according to the family, it was from the mother's side of the family, but none of the girls actually match the date as far as birth date. But so it's so what we're seeing here is sort of a difference in the development of dresses. So what's really cool, so this is actually wool. It is this beautiful striped and still bright material. This overshoot with a little bit of a peak is a second piece. It actually attaches around in the back with a button. And then the belt is a third piece. And so, you want me to turn? You want to go around?
I'll go around.
So on the back of the belt is this very fluffy bow. It's a little less fluffy now than it probably was in the first place, but so this was a way for when women were getting bustles, you're not putting little kids, young girls in bustles, but you are giving them a bow to kind of make that fullness towards the back. The other couple interesting things about this dress is that it has a pocket. So there's a little pocket hidden under the underskirt right here. It is lined in brown cotton, polished cotton. And the other thing you're seeing here is that someone altered this at some point or ran out of fabric. I'm not sure which, but there's this highly polished cotton that's adding some length at the waist. And then all these little panels, they must have run out of fabric is my thing, is covered by the overskirt. So you just never know. The next dress, actually, I've decided that did take a bit of a bustle. So this one is, I'm dating to about the 1880s because it has this flat front, but the height, the bustle in the back. So we're seeing a good bustle for that. And so it's believed to have been worn by Anne Payne Kaufman, who donated it, and she was born in 1872. So I have added a little fullness to the back because when you look at the seams here, it's definitely adding some layers. It's adding some fullness in the back, and the skirt just didn't sit right without a bustle. It's just a little padding. And then you can also see here how bright the pink really was at one time. It's really a Pepto-Bismol pink. I don't know if that's coming through.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the donor gave a dress almost exactly like it. It's the same style, but it's in brown and has a different decoration pattern, but otherwise it's made entirely the same way.
That little dress is very interesting because I have to say, in some ways, it has a chinoiserie vibe to it.
I'm sorry, say again.
It has sort of a chinoiserie vibe to it. The very
It
flat
does.
front, and the curvature of it, there, and the sort of collar. It's not. I wouldn't say. I would say like that's Chinese or Asian, but there feels like an influence in some way.
Yeah, the little lace collar came up for, and that's why I kind of put it in the 1880s. Is that's another indicator is that little lace collar. The red dress would have had an added collar, probably a larger one. And then the other thing you're seeing is this coat style sleeve. But I haven't seen another example of this. I haven't in a fashion plate, but some very, very similar. And then I wondered if it would take a belt or a bow of some kind, but it would have to go very high and really too high for the time period because it's almost functions as an overskirt. Okay, so this green dress here dates to 1892. It was worn by the donor, Lucy Logan Disha, and she remembered wearing this. This is what she said for dancing school parties when she was about 9 years old. So that would be about 1892. It is silk. It has these ribbons on the side, and so now we're seeing a big change in the sleeve and in the collar, and you're definitely seeing dresses like this in the fashion plates. Very, very similar. Even though I don't think she was from a wealthy family, as far as I can tell, she definitely was following fashion at the time. So it's a beautiful little dress. I'll cut off it there for that.
That's really lovely. Oh, and the pleating in the back. Look at that.
Yeah, yeah. So and in the back and in the front, it almost reminds me of the 1840s a little bit with all of the pleats. I keep pushing it. Sorry. On the front of the bodice here with all these pleats going up in a V. It's a little reminiscent of that, but sort of back to a V line from when they went to the apron front, and then it goes back to a V line. I'll try to keep this as simple as possible. I have no idea what this thing is. I know that it is a military school coat. According to the donor, it was worn by her uncle Thomas Wayne Scott Thompson, who would have, it looks like it might have fit about a 10-year-old or so, one of those, so boy schools, military schools. He would have been 10 in 1903. It has a Pettibone Manufacturing Company out of Cincinnati label on it, which was a big uniform company. Really, at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, this little kepi goes with it, or at least was donated with it. I don't think it's in the same, it would have been the same uniform. And it is inscribed with KMA, which I would love to think is the Kentucky Military Academy, except for Kentucky's biggest military school was the Kentucky Military Institute. And so the other thing that's confusing me about this is the yellow braid. Almost every military school had the black braid, just like West Point. So if anybody wants to do some research and some digging, let me know where you're going to find a dark gray military school coat with gold braid and perfectly round buttons. That's my challenge to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you. Actually, Heather made a comment about this. She says that Pettibone also made marching band uniforms.
They did. Into the 20th century, they stopped making so many the military school. They stopped military at all, like actually army and militias. But yeah, so they made a lot of band uniforms in the 20th century, and actually they still do, I think. I know they were still in the 50s. They also made swords of all things. They made those decorative, useless swords that would be used for military parades and also men's social groups like the Masons and things like that. They made a lot of those swords as well as the uniforms.
Yeah. So tell us about the exhibition that you have, Our Stories, Our Service.
Sure. So it is related in that Our Stories, Our Service is about Kentucky's women veterans. That exhibit talks about their experiences, their challenges, their triumphs. But one of the things that comes out of all of this is how uniforms and equipment changed for women because women demanded it. And as their jobs changed, the equipment had to change. So you had mentioned maternity uniforms before, or maternity clothing. We actually do have a maternity dress in the exhibit. So it is a temporary exhibit. It just opened a couple of months months ago, and it'll be open until the fall of 2024, I believe. I can't remember the exact date, but there's time to come and see it. And it covers military women from World War I to current day. And it's just a really great way to hear what the women themselves felt about their experiences.
And do you have some of those things online? Is any of that exhibit virtual for people who may not be close to Kentucky?
We do not have a virtual version of that exhibit. You can see some of the materials that are in the exhibit, and we have a number of videos that just kind of cover the goings on of the exhibit.
So if we go back to the question that you stated about the possible morning dress,
Yeah.
um, Connie in the audience says, I think the 1910 dress with the two bodices was not necessarily morning. We
Okay.
have at the New York State Museum a dress from the same time period that has beading under netting. I think it was more to make a more subtle design statement. So
Hmm.
Connie, we should talk about maybe having the New York State Museum be on D&D in the future so we can do a compare and contrast. Text me up.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so what do you think about that?
Well, that's great to hear, and that's what I always thought until I took a closer look just recently. I always thought, well, I guess they're trying to, create layers and so on, but it just seemed like it was a tragedy to cover up some of those beautiful colors. And then the other thing was the sleeves, but I would really love to compare those, especially if they're from an American designer as compared to, say, somebody from Paris like Worth, because this was an American designer.
Yeah. Um, and as you point out, it may have evolved over time because of the skirt with that. So I was wondering that too. I mean, in theater, I'm a costume designer by trade. In theater, we often will do that where it's like if it's a little too bright, we'll put a layer over it to sort of soften it. And I've been thinking about maybe that might be an evening dress or a ball dress where you have all that sparkling stuff that's there on top with that really sharp green pushing through. So it's a
Right.
continuous mystery uh,
Yes.
that way, but it's really interesting. But it also jet and all of that stuff falls into the morning. Although this would be really late morning, I think for green, you'd have to be pretty late in morning. Um, uh, the Victorian period to move into green, I would think. So
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Uh, and maybe that was, again, looking at her family members, um, you know, it's just a little bit too early. Maybe there's somebody else that what I missed. But.
Julie and Greg, thank you so much for this wonderful tour of your beautiful storage. We're all envious of your storage. You get purple ribbons from the State Fair about storage because that hat storage is amazing. To be able to see through it, I don't think I've ever seen that. Some other people can say like, oh, we have that too. That's pretty standard. But that's really wonderful. Um, but really lovely. Thank you so much. Beautiful objects, really gorgeous things. And it's always nice to see Worth, out and about. So thank you so much for your time today. And thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful episode of Dress and Drinks.